Our next presentation is by Matt Enloe, who is a graduate of Oregon State University, where he was the president of 3 student groups, one of them the Secular Student Alliance affiliate there, which is how he came to be connected to all of us today. While there, he grew the participants of that group from the low teens up into around 100, so definitely has a lot of success to bring with us. While he was on campus, the campus paper gave him the nickname of DiploMatt because he was so good at working with and having dialogue with the campus preachers like good old Brother Jed, who you've heard discussed earlier today, and Shawn the Baptist Holes as well, who I have not had the pleasure of meeting, unlike Brother Jed.
Oh, he's much better.
Oh, yes? Oh, well, I'll have to make a point of getting to know him. He will be heading to the University of Chicago Law School in September. Please join me in welcoming Matt to present to us today.
Okay, so before I start, who can tell me what movie this title is a pun on?
Dr. Strangelove.
Thank you. The full title?
Full title, Dr. Strangelove, How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb.
Excellent. Okay, so hi, my name is Matt Enloe, and I am here to recruit you. I'd like to recruit you to be activists on your campus. I'd like you to be passionate about what you do, and I'd like you to be good at it. So hopefully you're here to hear me speak about successful messaging, but you may be asking, who is this Matt Enloe? So let's start with a bit about me. I graduated summa cum laude from Oregon State University in June. I majored in philosophy and minored in psychology, and I'll be attending the University of Chicago Law School in the fall. I'm passionate about social justice and building communities, and while I was at OSU, I did a lot to try to help people find common ground and understand each other, especially groups you might not expect. I've seen a lot of presentations that teach people how to pick their words carefully to avoid conflict, but I don't think that's the whole story, or maybe even the best way to go about it. I don't focus on just what we have to say, but also how we say it. Oh, oops. Forgot that this doesn't go with that. So storytelling is one of my favorite tools. Stories play a big part in how we see the world and ourselves. Every time we describe an event in the past, we're telling our story of it. This is different for everyone, but that doesn't have to be a limiting factor. There is good news, everyone. Telling our stories and listening to those of others helps us connect to and gain the perspectives of other people and cultures. Many religions, world leaders, and others tap into this. The philosopher Richard Rorty has a great piece called Human Rights, Rationality, and Sentimentality. He writes about answering questions about morality and kinship with stories rather than rules and directives. Is more effective at communicating with people and helping them relate to us. Never doubt the power of the narrative. I have a lot of stories about work like this during my time at OSU, and if you ask me later, I'll be more than happy to tell them. I think that this one, though, offers a compelling narrative about how to help things go well when it seems like nothing can be changed. So, let me tell you a story. This is the story of the DiploMatt, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Preachers. Shawn the Baptist is a street preacher. Shawn first visited OSU my freshman year, and he is an interesting character. I'd heard from upperclassmen that preachers come every year, and I wanted to see it for myself, but it was way more than I was expecting. I was mad and I didn't know what to do about it, so I argued a lot. It kept him from harassing other students, but something still didn't feel right. Before he left, I exchanged emails with him. I asked him to let me know when he'd be coming back to town, and I checked in with him a few times over the course of the year. The next time he visited, after a bit of conversation, we came to an agreement. I asked him not to harass individual students and to focus his speech outward, away from the library, so it wouldn't bother the students trying to study. He could appreciate that. I did get called like ISIS, but we'll get there. The week after Shawn's second visit, we got another round of preachers, Ken Lightsey and his crew. Well, talking to Shawn worked, so why not try it again? Unfortunately, I had class most of the day, the day that they were there, but I still managed to speak to each of the preachers who were present individually. I gave them the same speech I gave Shawn, mind the students. They could go for that. We had another round of preachers 2 weeks after that, and it worked on them too. Whoa, magic. The school paper did a write-up about my efforts during the last visit. It was by far the most intense, and coined the nickname, the DiploMatt. There might be something to this. People seem to like it. I spent time over the summer thinking about what else we could do to improve. I'm a staunch advocate for self-reflection, early and often. Shawn came back this last fall. He brought someone new with him too. This was the debut of my bingo cards. They feature a custom phrase set composed of logical fallacies, offensive speech, and other bad arguments. When the preachers say or do something on a square, you mark it off and bingos win candy. They were a hit, both with students and Shawn. I gave away hundreds of cards. Shawn even asked me to explain what some of the fallacies were, and while he was preaching, played along with some of the people who were trying to finish off their bingos. After talking to Shawn and his new associate Keith, we settled the environment a bit and had a good time. Keith was the one who called me like ISIS, and we went from that hostility to a totally fun and positive environment. I spoke to Shawn at the end of the day. He said it had been his favorite visit and that he was glad to have met me. A big change from a few years ago. Who knows, maybe I'm growing on him. Shawn's visit left us with some preparation to do. We knew we'd have some more visitors in the spring. Our big players, the mystery guests I have yet to name, were adamant about making a return. We just didn't know when. We wanted to figure out what to make of the most of the situation. What went right? What went wrong? What did we miss? We talked about all of these questions as a group, redoubling our efforts to ensure the best possible experience for everyone, not just us. There's another question worth asking too. Most importantly, how do we get more students and groups involved and represented? I had sent out an email to our interfaith list about Shawn's visit, but there was minimal presence from other groups when Shawn showed up. It's important to remember that Christians don't like these guys either, and addressing that is a great way to show that you're on the same team. Here we go, our main event, Jed Smock and Mikkel Savenko. Now, Jed had announced his schedule, and we started negotiating. I promised them a bigger crowd if they could come on a Friday, because I didn't have class that day, and the deal was done. We invited all of the spiritual life groups on campus and all the others. There was an outpouring of support and gratitude for our organizing efforts from the Christian groups, and we had 8 total groups show up. There were 5 Christian groups, 2 other student groups, and us. As you've seen and will see, the Humans vs. Zombies folks were thrilled to be able to continue their free hugs campaign. They were a big hit with tour groups that day. We advertised on campus, especially in the residence halls. This helped both to promote the event itself and give people notice that they should avoid the MU Quad if they didn't want to be disrupted. It was a raging success. We survived the day. 16 pounds of candy, over 1,000 bingo cards, 8 hours of tabling and moderating later. I was a little bit sunburnt, very sore from running around handing out bingo cards all day, and mentally exhausted. All said and done though, everything went better than expected. We had positive responses from nearly everyone present, and even our detractors admitted that the outcome was preferable to situations past. Multiple professors and faculty even stopped by to tell us they loved what we were doing and how we had handled everything. Administration even wanted to help us get the space again in the future. It took a good month of political work to get the university to give us the main quad, but they were blown away by how well everything went. There's a picture somewhere of the MU staff with a giant teddy bear that someone brought. And the megaphone in the picture, I hadn't asked for that. They brought it out as a show of good faith when a landscaper was disrupting us. So let's get down to brass tacks. So what? Why put in all of this effort? I've got a few ideas about this. First, we made a negative environment positive. This is simple, right? There's a video on Jed timeline, public, you don't have to be friends with him to see it, of how the students at the University of Oregon treated him and Mikkel. It's violent, it looks horrible for their student body, and it's unnecessary. Instead of getting violent, we had fun. We built relationships with other campus groups. This is one of the members of the University Christian Center who was tabling. They brought lawn games. We broke stereotypes about secular groups and individuals. I proudly wore SSA and openly secular stickers all day, and we showed people that atheist heathens aren't the baby eaters that some profess us to be. We helped students take the power back. If you put your emotions to constructive use, you can transform yourself and those around you. What kind of person do you want to be? Context counts. This is where we get into some of the nitty-gritty. Let's talk about framing. Framing is the setting, scope, and context of an interaction. This applies to everything you do. While I'll primarily focus on potential confrontations, framing is also important for group discussions, advertising, and tabling. Arguments versus conversations. I have a personal mantra: if it becomes an argument, you've already lost. We often tune out the substance of what people say when we take up a fighting stance against them, and forget that they do the same. A conversation, on the other hand, is an opportunity for someone to take you at your word and understand you. In conversations, people pay attention. Framing requires influence and cooperation to be effective. You need influence in order for people to want to adopt your frame rather than substituting their own. Be someone people should want to follow. You need cooperation to attain that influence, but also makes sense because you don't want to be the only one trying to enforce that frame, right? Framing affects attitudes, behaviors, perceived importance, and how opinions form. There have been plenty of studies about this. How you hear any particular piece of information affects your perception of it. More people support an economic policy if the employment rate is highlighted rather than the corresponding unemployment rate. Why? It matches their narrative better. What makes bad framing? Well, a bad story. It leads to unintended consequences. For preachers in particular, they come to campuses and generally expect what you see in the picture on this slide. Now, Dancing Mike, the gentleman making these expressions, is a pillar of the Oregon State University community. This should tell you a lot about the guys who visit and get him that riled up. All the same, it matters how we approach the situation. Personal versus public. Who are you as an individual, and how do you want other people to see you? The way you chat with your friends in private Facebook messages might not be the way you want to conduct yourself in the presence of people who are looking for an opportunity to make the worst of you. This is where check yourself before you wreck yourself comes into play. Intent versus impact. What I'm about to say will probably hit home for many of you, and this bullet point is in fact one that the RD of my dorm would remind me of very often. What you intend to communicate can be very, very different from the impact you actually have, and you need to be mindful of the impact rather than the intent. After all, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And of course, misrepresentation. If you're not acting as a group member or leader in your interactions, you're probably representing your school, and you're always representing yourself. What does that mean to you? What kind of name do you want to make it for yourself, for your group, for your campus? Don't make the mistake of setting a bad example. But what makes good framing? Simple. Pay attention to the problems I mentioned earlier and focus your efforts on building bridges. But there are a few more things you can do too. Establish your environment. When we moved to the MU Quad instead of the library, we accomplished more than just a bigger space away from students. We gained the opportunity to table and were officially in control of the area. This let us set very clear goals and expectations with both the preachers and the groups tabling. Concentrate on community. No matter the situation, you should be focusing on bringing people together and offering them a great experience that they will later associate with you and your club. Attend to their needs and wants and pay special attention to identify anyone in distress so you can help them. Invest in interfaith efforts. This is huge. This is a picture of me with Tim Stover, the campus minister at the Westminster House. He and I chatted for a good hour or so in the morning before the preacher showed up, and it was fantastic getting to know him. Making connections with other group leaders and members can lead to joint events for name recognition. Hint, we did one with Crew, where Crew bought pizza from everyone from the best place in town, and there was enough to take home. It also means that students in those groups with questions or doubts can learn about you and have you as a resource. Now, have you ever had your parents say to you, "Don't give me that tone"? Yes, maybe? Maybe you meant what you said, maybe you didn't, but they snapped back at you for a reason. So let's talk about intentional tones. This is what you want to say, how you want to say it, and the means by which you portray it. It goes hand in hand with framing. Focus on cohesion, collaboration, and cooperation. These are all different things, so stick with me. Cohesion is about making sure your group is on the same page, so you'll want to do some training or just refreshers in preparation for tabling before the event, not just at the start of the year. Collaboration is being sure to reach out to other groups to both offer and ask for assistance because you're stronger together. It's okay to ask for help from your faculty advisor or others. Cooperation is about putting it all into action for a common purpose, the deeper why underlying all the groups and individuals who show up. Recognize that everyone in attendance is a potential ally and utilize them. Now, how about unintentional tones? This should be obvious, but I'll be clear. Avoid sarcasm. Trust me. Someone will misunderstand or mishear or otherwise distort your point. Sarcasm is also generally interpreted to be condescending even when it isn't meant to be, and reflects poorly on your group. As always, pay attention both to yourself and to others. It is vitally important that you read the room. Adapt your approach to your audience. Many of you may chuckle at this, for clarity, photoshopped picture, but I know plenty of crowds with whom it wouldn't go over so well. Always start formally with folks you don't know and ease into the jokes and lightheartedness as they warm up to you. They're probably on their guard, and you need to give them a reason to trust you. Time, place, and manner. This is very, very similar to intent versus impact, but has an important difference. The impact will differ based on each of these variables. You need to be aware of your environment and your communication. So what counts as an informal setting? Formal? As I just said, it's usually a safe bet to start with formally with most people you encounter, or until or unless you have good evidence otherwise. Meeting with school administrators, come prepared, bring backup if you can, so other officers, and be polite but firm. Mind the flow of conversation, though, and ease up as they do. Mimicry can actually have a positive influence on attitudes. We like people who are like us and who like us. If you're ever stuck or anxious, there's an easy way to consider all of this very quickly. Just like in school, use the 5, 6 W's. Who, what, when, where, why, and how. Each of these contains valuable information about the rules of the game and how to win it. So how about some examples? That's a lot of information. It's time for a little more storytelling. Behind the scenes of our success stories, we had to struggle and strive to make everything come together. Especially in certain areas, you will face opposition for your events. The fight for the MU Quad. I mentioned this briefly earlier, but it took some political maneuvering to finally lock in the main quad for the Street Preacher Bingo. General counsel for the university was apparently concerned that it would appear as though the university wanted the Hellfire and Brimstone preachers to come to campus. I know that sounds a little bit ridiculous, but that was the actual official explanation that we were given. What did it take to overcome this? Changing the frame. We explained the situation, the timeline of the events, and our response. Thanks to the help of Deb Mott and Lisa Potvin, we were able to pull off the event. Look at how happy those guys are. Okay, now on to the fight on the MU Quad. Well, I did actually break up 2 different potential fights between the students and Jed. That isn't really what I'm talking about. The Humans vs. Zombies folks not only gave out free hugs, as pictured, they also ran mock fights between zombie and human squads to entertain passersby and break the tension whenever things got too heated. They were great allies and helped us have an awesome day. But most importantly, you need to win some hearts and minds. It's not as hard as you think, but there are some things that make it easier. The most important speech that happened was speaking to the skeptics of the skeptics. Our club, Advocates for Free Thought and Skepticism, has grown considerably over the past year, but not everyone is a fan of us. There were plenty of people who had reservations about everything from the presence of the preachers to our playing Street Preacher Bingo, and by talking to them, we were able to help them understand us and change their frame of mind. I only ran into 2 or 3 people the entire day who were ultimately opposed to our approach. I wrote this FAQ to resolve a lot of that tension, and it really did work. Something I've already brought up and wholeheartedly believe in is learning and meeting the needs of our community. As fun as they are, tabling days aren't just about us, they're about our community. We need to know what they expect and how to help them, and to that end, we need to be constantly communicating for publicity and for feedback. You want people to show up to your event, but you also want them to enjoy it. Take them seriously, understand the perspectives they're coming from, ask them if you don't, and do your best to validate and appreciate them. They can be your biggest helpers or your greatest enemies. And having a good time. If you're not having a good time, what's the point? This can be hard work, but it should also be fun and rewarding. As long as you're being inclusive and making sure everyone can have fun, having a good time is usually a pretty good goal to aim for. So, I know that was fast. Let's briefly go over what we've learned. At this point, I'm posing these questions to all of you. Raise your hand if you think you've got a good answer. How should we frame our messages, and how do we actually do it? Anybody? Anybody? Bueller? Bueller? Nobody?
I think that we want to frame our messages to be positive and inclusive. And what we do is we listen to our opponents, listen to their concerns, and adapt to that.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. The way that I was able to communicate with each of the preachers was to meet them on their terms. I told them that they would be more effective in their preaching, more likely to convert people or whatever their goal was, and they'd get a bigger crowd if they were just a little bit nicer. All you have to do is not pick people out of the crowd to harass, and suddenly people aren't as afraid to start gathering around you. It's simple stuff. So what should our tone be, and how do we want to convey it? And only it.
Don't use sarcasm. Sorry.
That's a good one.
Be positive, be upbeat.
Good, good.
So much on the negative aspects of the argument.
Absolutely. Okay, now lastly, how do we know our audience and how do we reach them appropriately?
I think to regurgitate what you said, that we really have to meet them on their own terms. We have to consider it from their point of view, and by doing so, we can reach them more effectively.
Absolutely, good work. Okay, so for the resources, where do we go from here? To wrap things up, I've got 2 books that I think are particularly great. The first is Mark Edmondson's Why Read? An essay of his titled Who Are You and What Are You Doing Here was the catalyst for my success in undergrad, and I recommend this book to just about everyone I can. The second is a collection of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s speeches and writings, A Testament of Hope. A class that I took on the philosophies of Dr. King is extremely powerful for me and helped me figure out who I want to be as a student, an activist, and a person. Maybe it'll lend a little strength to you too. Now, this is something a little bit special. When Jed and Mikkel went down to the University of California schools this year, I saw some students at UC Davis commenting on one of his pictures. I started talking with one of them, and as a result of that conversation, I've started writing what I call the Emergency Preacher Preparedness Kit. It will be freely and widely available, featuring as much advice and insight as I can muster to help any campus be ready to deal with street preachers. You'll probably see some overlap from this presentation, but it's much more elaborated upon, and I really am pouring pouring my heart into it. Now, finally, I'd encourage you all to talk to some strangers. While waiting for my plane home from Admitted Students Weekend at UChicago, I had a great conversation with a woman about helping her daughter improve diversity and community at her middle school. They live in Atlanta. I'll probably never see them again. But she was grateful for the conversation and said that God must have made it happen. Now, I'm not so sure about that, but chats like those are some of my favorite, and they help make change in the world, one person at a time. So, thanks so much for your time, and if you have any questions or would like to talk more, please do come and find me. I also have more reading suggestions if you fancy yourself a bookworm. Have a great rest of the conference, and if we have time, I'll take questions. Is that it?
We're good. We have some minutes.
How many?
At least 5.
Awesome. Any questions?
We actually have your street bingo pretty often ready, but our student center has been under renovation. We haven't had anyone visit yet, but we are ready. Students.
Excellent. I have my...
There's a preacher at South Alabama.
Oh, good.
Definitely use that.
I have my own version of the bingo cards that I came up with that I can distribute to you guys. I'll make a custom version for your university because I have a premium account on the site that I use to print them, and so I can do like custom stuff. So contact me, and I'd be glad to help that happen.
We have a preacher who comes to our campus whose entire purpose the whole day is to try to get students to punch him so he can call the cops. How do you propose?
Freedom from Religion Foundation, ACLU, other legal advocacy groups.
Right.
If he is asking you to punch him, hold on. I am not a lawyer and cannot give legal advice. I need to say that, but that is interesting because if he is consenting to it and if he's demonstrating verbal consent,
He just gets in people's faces and yells at them and has a history of reporting people once they retaliate kind of thing. It's not so much he's like, hit me, see what you can do. It's not that.
okay.
That's been his history, and I just don't know, like, if in that sort of situation talking to him would be the right path.
I mean, that's what Jed and Mikkel do. Mikkel has a sign that says you deserve hell. Jed shouts at people. It's all a little bit crazy.
Right.
I was just nice to them, and it worked really, really well. We bought Jed like tea. He was like, "Can we get you something?" in the morning when he showed up, and he like that set the mood for the whole day. So just be chill. In the middle, sorry.
We had a preacher in South Alabama who was like racist, homophobic slurs and stuff. I mean, like, what do you really do?
I have bingo squares for those. Those are bingo squares, homophobic content and racist content, yeah. I put them on the bingo squares, and it disincentivizes people from using the stuff on the bingo card because it's entirely possible to have an entire day of well-intentioned, well-thought-out, important preaching and not get a bingo. And so if the preachers are paying attention, they'll be better preachers if they're not saying the stuff on the cards, if they're not making logical fallacies, if they're not being offensive, if they're not being bad people. It inspires them to be better people just like you, and it helps you know how to respond to them when they're being assholes because like the U of O students, when people don't have the ability or the knowledge about how they can respond, they'll get violent. Violence is a tool of the oppressed. It's the language of the unheard, and I think that if you have the ability to speak your anger, it becomes much more effective.
So, that CB thing I mentioned yesterday, when we were staging our counter protest, a thing that a lot of people said is whatever you do, don't talk to them. We'll do our thing, but we encourage people don't have anyone come up to them, don't talk to them. I know it's a little different for street preachers, but how do you feel about that approach?
With who?
That Center for Bioethics, well, the abortion people.
Oh, the abortion people. I would absolutely talk to them. I would talk their ear off. I would be beyond kind to them. I would tell them how they could get their message across better if they weren't so violent and if they weren't trying to cause harm to people. I would tell them that they are trying to cause harm to people whether they want to admit it or not, and I would do my best to try to get some examples of that if possible. You have to figure out what their narrative is. You have to listen to them a little bit, even if it's uncomfortable. So don't do it if you can't feel up to it. Greta Christina says self-care is not selfish, and you need to take care of yourself. If you're not up to it, then don't do it. But if you do have group members who are up to that, I would absolutely talk to them and listen to them, and then meet them on their terms. I studied pragmatism when I did philosophy. There's a great piece by Charles Taylor, it's on my recommended readings, called An Unforced Consensus on Human Rights. And he talks about how in Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew did not want to conform with human rights standards because he said that they didn't meet Eastern values. Well, it turns out that there is an Eastern value in Buddhism Buddhism called ahimsa. It means nonviolence. And nonviolence means not causing harm to people, not just like not hitting them, right? And so you can figure out what their values are and then demonstrate how what they're doing contradicts their own values. And that can be a little bit tricky because I'm sure that they're very well rehearsed and know their spiel very well and can justify it very well. But if you can start to find the cracks in that armor and connect with them on a human level because you're willing to listen to them because it's a conversation, not an argument, then I think you can make some progress. It certainly took multiple years for these guys to get better. Shawn was much more vitriolic the first time that he was on our campus, but this last time in the fall, he was like pretty nice. I actually really enjoyed talking to him, and he was like happy to see me and everything. I'm gonna write him an email to ask him how he's doing. But it's possible. It takes effort, but it's possible. Especially if you're a repeat face over time, I think it's doable.
How did you, does the way that you found out like when they were coming to organize the Street Preacher Bingo is just by establishing the relationship one time when they randomly had shown up?
Yep.
Because we have them at Katie, they come quite often, I just don't know how we would figure out.
Ask them when they're going to come back. And if they won't tell you, have a Christian group ask them, because they'll tell the Christian group. No, make allies, do interfaith work together on this. And it's doable. I just asked them. I was like, I'm the president of AFS, I'd like to know when you're going to come back. We'd like to I told them I'd get them a bigger crowd, and I did. I'm happy to have a bigger crowd for them because it's an opportunity for me, not for them. I'm taking the power from them and changing the frame where it's, hey, these guys are going to be on campus whether we like it or not, so come and join us and have some fun so that we don't hurt people. And I think that works really well. Anybody else?
How do you establish your relationships with Christian groups? Did you just say, let's join together and make sure this is a positive influence?
Yeah, so we have an interfaith listserv at our school. You might not, and if you don't, go to the club fairs, look them up on club lists, just email them, talk to them, start the conversation. It works a lot better in person, but that's not always an option. Just start reaching out to people. I know that sounds weird and hard, but I promise it isn't. And they're usually happy to hear from you because maybe they think they can convert you. In the back?
Yes, have you had much success in transferring these strategies to online interaction?
Yeah, it's harder because people are dehumanizing. The human element and part of the connection is really important there, but it's still doable. In fact, when I organized against the Westboro Baptist Church, I don't think this was read from my bio, I organized over 5,000 people in a counter-protest to the Westboro Baptist Church in the span of 5 days. And the Westboro Baptist Church never even came to Corvallis, as confirmed by the Oregon State Police, so hell yeah. It was all online. I hadn't met any of these people. They were from everywhere. It was completely conflicting ideological groups, every end of every spectrum, and they all worked together. And all I did was be nice to them. I told them what to do. I was like, if you do this, we'll be successful, and they listened. So people will follow your instructions if they agree with the outcomes. You don't have to necessarily agree on the nitty-gritty details if you can agree on the end result. Unforced consensus. Final questions? All right, thank you so much. Have a great rest of the conference.